Hello. Welcome to another trip down Joliet's memory lane where we look at Joliet's past, who lived in our city, and what made it interesting. This month we're going to be talking about the Joliet Country Club. Before it was known as Joliet Country Club, JCC was born out of the Union League Club of Joliet. Its original headquarters were in the Joliet Opera House block, later at the Masonic Temple, and eventually at Spencer Road. According to an article from 1902, the Union League Club was listed as the city's premier social club. At the time, the club did not allow any liquor nor gambling. In 1907, the Union League leased a 30-acre farm known as Schutt's Farm with an option to buy. But it was not until 1911 that the club decided to abandon their club rooms in downtown Joliet and build the new club grounds. And here we are, we're looking at an early article about the Union League. And this is Mr. Wilcox, who was president of the Union League. And also some early members of the Union League. You'll see a lot of familiar local last names, including Bates, Barr, Barrett, Julian Barnes, the renowned Joliet architect, Clement, Cheney, Chamberlain, Cheadle, Carey, Ingalls, Dr. Stewart, Stillman, Stevens, Patterson, Goodspeed, Gerlach of the Gerlach Barklow, Humphrey of the Humphrey Foundry, Springer, Talcott, many, many others. Let's look at the next one. And a few more names on here you might recognize. Fellman from the Boston store. Fagans, they had a jewelry store. Charles M. Fish, he had the Fish Mansion. O'Donnell, Vance had furniture. Dr. Woodruff, of course. Whitgrove, Wagner, Westfall, Julian Westfall, and the Westfall Bank. Many, many others. And as I was saying, the clubhouse formally opened to members on New Year's Day in 1912. And an important thing to know about JCC is it wasn't just used for pleasure or entertainment. On a more serious note, it was used during the Spanish flu epidemic. There was such a high number of cases of the Spanish flu in our area, and our hospitals were very overwhelmed. JCC was turned into a makeshift hospital. They took in children of parents who had the flu. Some of the children were sick, some were not. And here we are, we're looking at a photo with groundskeeper Eric Erickson. Some of the other names mentioned on here are Bergstrom, Gleason, Fox, and Robinson. And one thing about Country Club you'll also see as we talk here is it's been a site of many social events. This particular article talks about the coming of the Illinois Golf Association to Joliet. And what I found kind of interesting about it is turning over the reins to the ladies to help with the entertainment. It said the women who were willing as ever are making the very best of their venture. And they helped arrange the 3 days meet at the Union Club apartments. Let's go on to our next slide. The Woodruff family has early ties to Union League Club and JCC. This particular photo is from 1926. Frederick Woodruff was president of First National Bank, and the contract to build his home here was awarded to Hanson and Peterson Company. His home was built on land directly east of the Country Club and was Spanish style in architecture with hollow tile and a cement finish. The Woodruff family's large estate was there, and I was told that Diamond K Lane was named in honor of K. Woodruff's horse. I'm still trying to verify that. Kay grew up to marry Marshall Field, And here you can see Frederick Woodruff with his darling little daughter, Kay Woodruff, getting ready to golf, early lessons there. And here's a look at Diamond K Lane today, a house that's for sale on it right now. The Woodruff home was later demolished and a mid-century home went up in its place. The home was later owned by Al Kukis of Al's Steakhouse. And the home, like I said, sold again about 10 years ago and is currently on the market. Let's take a look at JCC's clubhouse. Well, actually, this is a back view from that house. Then we'll get there. Okay, here we are, clubhouse. The clubhouse was designed by local architect R.G. Hone, and it was English half timber style. This particular photo comes from the rare series of books called Artworks of Joliet, which was written in the early 1900s. The Joliet Public Library does have a copy of this series of books at the Iowa Street branch on the second floor. You can also probably see this photo if you go online at the Joliet Area Historical Museum. They have copies of all the photos from that book. An early member of JCC and Union League was Clement Witwer. Mr. Witwer was treasurer and general manager of the Joliet Manufacturing Company. And this was his home on Cass Street. Unfortunately, it's no longer there, and there's a fast food place, and it's where it once stood. This photo is from 1929. It shows Heine Sick, the assistant pro at the club, teaching Marie Seneker how to hold her club correctly. And you see a little quote at the bottom. It says, "Get the right hold," says Sick. Here we are, another photo from 1929. This is Mrs. Leo Perry, an avid golfing enthusiast. You'll see at least one other photo of her in my talk tonight. She started golfing in 1926 and was immediately hooked on it. The champion golfer credited her success with practicing multiple times a week. All right, and here we are, a couple more photos from 1929. These are of a Pirates Party gala event at the country club. The top photo has Rachel Hill, Mrs. Barr, Marie Dibble, Marjorie Livingston, and Marion Brown. And the second photo has Mrs. Fay, Mrs. Faulkner, Joseph Barr, Mrs. Pogue, John Donahoe, Mrs. Faulkner, Mr. Faulkner, Ellis Pogue, and Mrs. Donahoe. And here we are, Marion Zalar. She and her husband, Francis Curry, a well-known name in Joliet, had their wedding reception at Joliet Country Club. It was said to be a rather spectacular event. It had 300 guests in attendance. Another social event here. We have Country Club hostess, Mrs. Harry Keeley of Raynor Avenue. She was chosen in 1939 to be the hostess of the fall and winter bridge parties at the country club. And Mrs. Holbrook of Bryan Avenue hosted a Valentine's Bridge luncheon at Joliet Country Club in 1929. And here's a clipping from when Mrs. Raymond Lennon hosted a St. Patrick's Day party there. And I'll read you a few of the names here. Gleason's, that's a Joliet name. Goslin's, of course, a Phoenix Horseshoe. McDermott, Kip, which we know the Kip Jewelers. Burke, possibly related to Judge Burke. Let's see, more Lennons, the Adlers who are related to the Lennons. McDonald's, Schuster, another old Joliet name. And the Brauns, Mrs. Braun's husband was an alderman at Joliet and a partner at Porter Brewery. George Mahoney, And of course, Mahoney's were tied to the Rialto. We've got Werner, Gavigan, Stevens, Ulm, Pierce, more Lennons, and Cassidays. Moving on, we are at 1935 here, Halloween party. And I suspect this picture was taken in my home on Western Avenue. It features Miriam McFarland, and she was the daughter of our famous boxing legend, Packy McFarland. In the photo with her is Agnes Weinbrod, and Agnes grew up in a mansion over on Black Road, huge Tudor mansion. Anna Louise Frank, Billy Burrell, Jerry Daggett, and they were gathering these young ladies to plan their Halloween party that they were hosting at the country club. Here's a few more clippings. We got 1934 bridge party with the Catholic Women's League. And here's Miriam McFarland's mother mentioned, Mrs. Patrick McFarland. She was a Lochran, and her father was a real estate magnate and also a partner in Porter Brewery. Mrs. Frank McFadden. And aside from McFadden's here, we have Fitzgerald's. Fitzgerald's tied to Fitzgerald Furniture, Dunn, McCoy, White. And these are the Douse children, King and Molly. These photos were taken at the club in the 1920s. You can see King taking the picture of his little sister. And these two photos I took actually off of eBay. They are sterling silver swim champ medals from the Joliet Country Club. The swim team and the divers at Joliet Country Club were said to be tops in the area. One of the more recent swimmers from there, Sandy Lyons, even tried to make the U.S. Olympic swim team. And here we are with some pretty mermaids among the swimming enthusiasts who will dive into the new country club pool when it was formally opened that particular summer. On the diving boards, left to right, are Jimmy Riley, Miss Jane Fay, and Miss Rosalie Goslin. As I mentioned, Goslin's was Phoenix Horseshoe, and the Fays, of course, with Champion Machinery. In the 1940s here, we have Society finding relief at the pool. Let's take a look. And bear with me as I find my notes on this particular clipping. Thought I had this one all together. Okay, here we go. Okay, Jane Murdoch is coming out of the pool. I'm going to go back one. There she is. She's on the top right. And let's go to the next slide. And we have Bobby Woodruff on top left. We have Bernice Blackwood and Betty McKeever. Rosalie Goslin is behind the life preserver, and we saw her a couple photos back. And then in the bottom right, you see Dorothy Hennings and Bernice Rosen. And this is a sketch someone sent me. It's from July 27th, 1939. And if you look at the top, it says Anderson, Dr. Anderson, the one-armed player, drove 300 yards at the Joliet Country Club in 1910. Pretty cool. So we've been looking at the outside of the country club. How about we move inside? These next sketches will include the interior view, the photos. The last one will include Billy Leemacher and Al Agazy. The Agazy family is one name often associated with Joliet Country Club. Al Agazy started there as a caddy in the 1920s. He worked as master, then assistant pro, then then pro manager, and eventually being manager there. And he worked there until 1970 when he died. I had the privilege of talking to his son, Baba Gazy. He says the family moved on to the JCC property in 1953. They were in an apartment on the upper floor of the country club. Bob stayed there until he went in the Army in 1967. Then he came back there again. He joined the club main house in 1984. Some other memories of living there and stories he heard at the time. Bob mentioned that in the late 1940s and through the 1950s, the Roy Gordon Orchestra had monthly parties there, usually about 200 to 250 people. They served breakfast at 2 o'clock in the morning, even. He also mentioned the good swim teams there, and there was also skeet shooting. There were also derby days in the 1940s where Joliet Country Club, Inwood, and Woodruff would play matches with 36 holes, 18 in the morning, 18 in the afternoon, with 500 watchers. A lot of golf enthusiasts in our area. And in the 1950s and 1960s, for the 4th of July fireworks, the roads were lined with hundreds of people to watch. So here's the dining room in the 1950s. Looks very mid-century modern. And some other things that Mr. Agassiz mentioned to me, there were a lot of bankers who were members in the mid-century. A lot of doctors, dentists, lawyers. He said that changed a little bit as time went on. Some of the members' names he remembered were Emick, Bill Jacobs, Vidmar, Basinger, Pila, Kane, Streitz, Stevens, Woodruff, and Faulkner. So here's the lounge. Another side view of the lounge. And this last one is Baba Gazy's father looking out the window, and next to him is the late and great Billy Leemacher, wonderful history-oriented woman who tried very hard to save our Bluff Street. And let's go to the next one. Okay, some more 1950s JCC. We've got Peggy Maher, Jack Duffy, Bill Carey, and Marion Zivik. This next photo here has Paul Hudek, Mary Claire Guillory, Maxine Cohen, Herm Stonich, and Mr. and Mrs. Ian Walsh are in the background. How about some water ballet? We have Yvonne Saron, Mary Jo Saron, Sally Perry, Boo Lennon, and Anita Cunningham, showing off their water ballet skills. Ladies of Rotary. The Ladies of Rotary hosted a monthly meeting at JCC, and this particular one, the topic was antiques as a hobby. In the photo are Mrs. Gessing, Mrs. Charlie, Mrs. Churchill, and Mrs. Lennon. And here is a clipping from 1960 with a realtor's outing. It's from the Joliet Spectre showing their outing at JCC. Pictured are Tom Hennessy, Fred Groney, Jack McCambridge, and Bill Weatherston. We have many famous people come to Joliet Country Club. I don't have time to talk about all of them, but certainly a few of them. Arnold Palmer and Gary Player, probably two of the biggest names to come there. My friend Jay Comerford told me that James Red McCarthy was a local insurance man who was friends with Arnold Palmer and did his insurance. And he knew all of the big players back in the day, Red did. Gary Player was at the course in the early 1960s. Maggie Primiano's father was able to play 3 holes with Gary at the course. Not to be outdone by the men, some famous ladies were also at our country club. Patty Berg and Mickey Wright. And here's a group of lady players from 1954. We have Mrs. Oberwortman, Mrs. Meyer, and Mrs. Perry. Probably one of the best women golfers ever at Joliet Country Club was Mary Lou Fitzgerald Silk. Her family was of Fitzgerald furniture. I'm told she won so many times and for so many years that she would often sit out so that other ladies would get a turn at being champ. Her foursome consisted of Patty Palmer, Jean Stevens, the late Alice Goldhaber, and herself. This photo of her is courtesy of my friend Tim Broderick, who was her nephew. Here's a summer bridge party at JCC in the 1960s. We have Mrs. Winther, Mrs. Morgan, Mrs. McDonald, Mrs. Klett, and Mrs. Reardon. And here we are with another group. We have Mrs. McIntyre, Mrs. Lennon, Mrs. Henneberry, and also Mrs. McIntyre. And here's Mrs. Newkirk, also at that summer bridge party from the 1960s. And in November 1960, these 2 ladies are planning a cocktail dance. You're seeing Mrs. Osborne and Mrs. Smith. Oh, I'm going to go back one again. About that dance, it was a candlelight dance from November 1960. It had red carpet, a canopy, Roy Gordon Orchestra, like we talked about before. The chairmen of the event were Mr. and Mrs. Walt, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and on the committee were the Lewis, Hickey, Kelly, Laraway, and Osborne families. Okay, 1954, opening of the pool. They look ready to dive in. And in the photo, here we are. The new assistant lifeguard is Jim Beck. And I believe left to right is Sally Klett, Lee Gray, Nancy Lauer, and Peggy O'Donnell. Quick mention here on Penny O'Donnell. Penny was a longtime friend of Sue Lyons Andriano. According to Sue's daughter, Sarah, Penny met her future husband, Judge Adcock, at JCC, and they later moved to Grundy County. So there were golf matches there and marriage matches too. Next slide. Enjoying the cool in the pool. We have the McCarthy children here, Kelly McCarthy, Thomas McCarthy, and Mary Beth Annis. Another luncheon and bridge, and this one's from the 1960s. We have Mrs. Greenlee, Mrs. Wiseman, Mrs. Letty, and Mrs. Hauk. And 2 other regular bridge players there are Mrs. Marcoux and Mrs. McCoy. And here's a Rotary Golf Club outing at the club from 1964 with Bart Jewell and Bill Roth. Next, we have David Bradley, Walter Hirschbach, Morrill Palmer, and Willard Curtis. And this one, we have Fred Hintz, Ari Delrose, Henry Searing, and Joe Zalar. And this last one here, we have Howard Weber, John Honey Otis, Roy Hendrickson, and Art Rimke. Next, I'd like to talk about John Walsh, and I would like to take a moment here to thank his family for sharing so much information with me as well as the photos. According to his daughter Lizzie, John started as a caddy at 12 years old during the Depression. He worked at the Beverly Country Club, and that got his love of golf going. Lizzie said her father's family was very poor. He did go to college and went into banking, but his love of golf drew him back to find some type of career with golf. She said he was an amazing teacher and taught many members of the country club. He started working there in 1957 and retired in 1994. Anyone who had success in golf during those years, uh, their success had something to do with John Walsh. Let's see some more information about him. She said he was a great role model, known for his integrity and kindness. He was also tough. If an adult member was being obnoxious at the club, he would let them know. Let's see what else she said. All right. Great memories and a long, very great career. Um, he was hired, I'm finding a few more notes. He was hired by Allegheny in 1957. He was paid $350 a month for 9 months at that time. Uh, when John came there, there was no pro shop at JCC, but John made that happen. John's brother Pat became his assistant and caddy master. Some other improvements he put in were a sprinkling system. He also improved the holes and the driving range. This next photo is courtesy of my friend Sarah Andriano. This is smiling Sam Andriano. He was from Des Moines, Iowa. He began caddying when he was 14 years old. He caddied for many famous and well-heeled people back in the day, including Jackie Gleason, Frank Sinatra, and Dean Martin when they were in town where Sam was growing up in Iowa. He also caddied for the publisher and owner of Good Housekeeping magazine, who gave Sam a $10,000 gift to go to college. At the time, he was planning on going to seminary, but he ended up meeting his future wife, Sue Lyons of Joliet, in college. Upon marrying, Sam moved here and finished law school. He needed a job and happened to be at the country club when he ran into Mr. Schenk, who had his own law firm here. Schenk said his firm needed a new attorney. So Sam showed up at the firm the next day and said he was ready to work. And thus became his career there at that firm. He was a champion of the club for at least 8 times. These next colored photos from the 1970s are also courtesy of Sarah Andriano. They were taken at JCC and show some of the regulars from that particular time. And here's a smiling Sam and his wife, Sue Lyons, so I talked about before when I was mentioning Penny O'Donnell. And this is them in the 70s. Our next ones are Bob and Joyce Schenk. And I talked about Schenks a moment ago. And this one is Sparky Hawk and his wife. Wait, no, I'm sorry. This is Bob and Joyce Schenk again. All right. Okay, here we are. Here's Sparky Hawk, his wife, and Becky Brown. This next one is Marianne Buck and Doug and Sue Hutchison. This one is of Bill Joyce. And I'm not sure who's in this one, but they look like they're getting pretty groovy on the dance floor here. And now we're moving on to the 1980s. Most of the golfers at Catholic High were regulars at the country club, and these some of these great players included Dan Duffy, Tom Brown, and Tom Barron. And here we are, another clipping from the yearbook from 82. And here we are. These are my cousin Mike and his lovely wife Carrie. And Mike has been a regular at the country club for years. He has his whole family and his mom and his grandpa too. And here's the newly remodeled country club. Despite a large investment to have a new facility, the country club began to decline in more recent years. The name was switched from Joliet Country Club to Joliet Golf Club, but did not survive and was recently, unfortunately, shuttered for good. There's much talk about what will happen to the land, but the memories will long survive whatever the fate happens to be of that particular piece of real estate. Um, and here we are. This is a little bit of afterlife of the club. This is my good friend Owen McCarthy, and Owen started working at the country club when he was in 8th grade. He started out as a caddy, and he did it for 2 years. Then he went to grounds, working there for 3 years with his uncle Pat, uh, cutting grass and greens. He did this from grade school through high school. And then once he started school after high school, he'd come there on Easter vacation. He mentioned that his beloved Uncle Pat was killed in a welding accident at the country club. And in memory of Pat, there's a spot there that's been named Lake McCarthy. And a funny thing about Owen, when he retired from working as an accountant and financial advisor, he wanted to go back and work at the country club again. He retired from his regular day job in 2017, and he wanted to go back on the greens again. He started working there, cutting the greens, general labor. He did that until the country club, then turned Joliet Golf Club, closed. And he had so many great memories of there that one day last year he decided to go drive by, and the property was roped off, and he got out of his car and he was looking at it, and someone approached him and asked, can I help you? And he says, oh, I'm just remembering things, and I used to work here. And the guy said, well, I don't suppose you know how to run this equipment. He says, yeah, that was my job. So ever since the golf club closed, Owen has been kind of living his dream of taking care of the greens again. So he's there making it look beautiful, and he loves it. So before I go, and I'd just like to thank the many people who helped with this, the Agazy family. Um, of course, I wanted to thank Owen, Sarah Andriano, gosh, many people. I don't think I have time to mention them all, but you know who you are, and I could not have done this talk without you. Let's talk about a few future talks that are coming up. And next, we're going to have Patriotic Joliet. We're going to look at our history of patriotism from the Revolutionary War up to current times. After that, I want to talk about the history of Marquette Gardens neighborhood on the west side, the people who live there, their stories. And then in September, just in time for Oktoberfest, we're going to be talking about Joliet's German families. These are our German Catholic families and Lutheran families who were among our early settlers and played a big part in making our city a success. In October, I want to spook you with paranormal Joliet area history. In that particular talk, we're going to have ghost stories tied to our area, UFO sightings, and even a story about a giant skeleton found in our area. Then in November, we're going to be talking about the harvest, and that's going to feature farming families in Joliet and harvest traditions. And last but not least, we're going to do another vintage Joliet Christmas talk. So I really need your family Christmas photos. I'm looking for photos from 1970s and back. Just, pictures of your Christmas memories. Also going to include pictures of downtown Joliet, all decorated for Christmas. If you have any questions or you want to get in touch with me, best way is to email. I'm very sorry, but I'm slow at responding, so just nag me until you hear from me. My email is Mary Gannon, MaryGannon, N is in Nancy, U is in University, at gmail.com. And thank you to all of you, and thank you, Joliet Public Library.